Welcome everybody to the weekly update from the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program. My name is Kevin Martin and I'm here with Jennifer Phillips Russo. You probably can't tell, but this is a special evening edition. You'll see this as on a recording, so it makes no difference to you guys. But we did want to take a chance before we get a little busy this week to talk about Veraison and what has occurred since our podcast last week. We kind of hinted that we knew it was coming, so I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and she's going to talk about what we found so far and when we found it.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So we did officially call Veraison at the Clairol Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Laboratory in Portland, New York on August 21st. So what is it? You have to have at least 5%, and we're talking Concord here. Concord Veraison is what we're calling. You have to have at least 5% purple on your clusters. So we called it on the 21st, which is a day earlier than our 45-year average. So here we go. Game on.
Excellent. It seems pretty uniform this year. I've seen it kind of all over the place, especially at this point. It's now the 25th, the evening of the 25th. So it seems like Veraison is pretty much, or we're past it pretty much everywhere. It looks like you've got a pretty good shot behind you of what looks like 5%, but I think we're well past that at this point. A lot of sites. So now that we've made it through Veraison a day early, what kind of things do you anticipate in terms of critical activities for growers for, I guess, the next month? Less than a month?
You should be looking at your sugars, or at least start testing your sugars. Maybe not this week because it just so happened, but get out there, dust off the old refractometer, and you should be collecting 100 berry samples. We do have information coming out in our newsletter. That's coming, I believe, Friday. Hopefully it's going to hit. So if you need to know how to do that, but a quick review is when you're walking through, you want to grab berries from 3 different parts of the cluster down your row, and you want to grab 100 berries. You want to grab at least like a 3-to-1 ratio of the top and the middle berries to the bottom berry, to the very tip. So make sure, and I just kind of don't even look. I just stick my hand in the canopy and grab all over. So you don't want to pick the ripest ones because you don't want to be biased and cheat yourself on that. So make sure you get a good sample all across the row. Then you're going to smash it up in your bag, pour it on your refractometer, and watch your bricks climb. Hopefully, yeah, hopefully. Well, this year I don't think it's going to be such a problem because it's been so dry. We anticipated Veraison happening on the 24th, but the weather is just so conducive, and we have smaller berries this year. There's a smaller crop out there, so all of the photosynthesis is going to make sugars, and I'm thinking in theory that we should go a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I mean, obviously September weather, October weather, whichever it is, but it seems like smaller berries would potentially lead to some early ripening.
Potentially. Just make sure you get out there and test them.
Yeah, and I just want to throw out there, because usually I kind of touch on the reason you test for bricks in a particular year from a management perspective. And you always test for bricks, or you always should. Obviously, I think a lot of growers test for bricks when they think they're close. So if they have this giant crop and they're at 11 bricks, they don't do a lot of testing because they know they're not there. And if they have this very small crop and they know they're going to hit 17 bricks, they don't test because they know they're going to be there. But there always is a reason to test. And I think what I would look for this year, we have some experience with this in Niagara's, is you really want to make sure you're monitoring differences in bricks from block to block. Obviously, it's just good from an experiential standpoint to kind of figure out what's going on phenologically with your vines, to see if there's patterns that maybe you need to manage. But more importantly, at least in the immediate period of time, is to try to figure out how you time your harvest and where you're going to harvest. So if you have, once you have a good understanding of what your schedule is, we have a lot of growers that may harvest Monday, Tuesday, and that's it. So if you decide not to harvest on Tuesday, it's going to be 7 days later. So what we've seen for sure in Niagara's is insect and diseases become a problem. So if you don't have really, really clean fruit and you hit 15, 16 bricks, you lose crop, and you lose a lot of it quickly. I don't think it's quite the same in Concord, But certainly we know as the crop matures, when there's stress from disease or insects or damage, you lose a lot of crop. It's not, I don't think it's quite as sensitive at low Brix as Niagara is, but it happens. So that's how I would strategically harvest my grapes as I could. You know, as soon as they hit 15.5 Brix, I'd be harvesting whatever looks the dirtiest, whatever I'm worried about in terms of vine size, whether it's, you know, wherever I see problems is where I want to harvest. I want to harvest those as soon as I can. Maybe not, especially in a year like this at 14.5 Brix, but 15.5. And by the first or second week of September, you're probably going to know what that curve is going to look like and where that variation is going to be. I don't think there's going to be, you know, if you have two blocks right next to each other and they're performing differently, that's not just going to change and equalize between September 15th and September 27th. So from a management perspective, to try to maximize your revenue, that's how I would harvest. I would not get caught up in the idea of trying to make sure everything gets to 18 Brix so I get a huge paycheck. And psychologically, that can be very difficult because it does seem like a nice bonus, but when you're accomplishing those goals of high Brix through stressing vines and losing crop, your actual check is smaller, even though your dollars per ton are higher. So that's something that comes into play in a year like this, even though.
And I have seen disease creeping back in as I've been throughout. So, and I've heard rumors of it as well. Reports, not rumors. People calling me in about powder is in there. And so, yes, definitely.
Yeah, and that's nothing scary. I mean, I think unless you're hearing something different than I am, you know.
No, there's not a lot.
But if you start to see any kind of damage to berries is where I would try to harvest as early as I could without taking a real penalty on Brix. And in Niagara, it actually makes sense to take that penalty. So whatever the minimum standard is, if you have berry moth pressure, you should be aiming for that minimum standard harvesting the first day you're allowed to harvest. If the choice is yours to wait, you're going to lose crop. We worked with Brian Head, it was quite a few years ago now, when late season Niagara harvest was just becoming a thing. And they sprayed lots and lots of insecticides, more than any commercial grower sprays, and they still could not get crop size and tonnage to be the same where they harvested late. So even though berries continued to grow, they lost more to grape berry moth. They think it was likely almost all grape berry moth, not other diseases, than they gained from berry size and weighting and Brix. So it just,
really?
Yeah. And it was at the Northeast lab. So it's not like it was, you know, there's not zero pressure at the Northeast lab, and it actually has gotten a little worse. There's a little more pressure there now than there was, but it's nothing that you would call an extremely high risk site. And it was still a problem. So pretty much any commercial vineyard that sprays for berry moth at all, that's how I would manage Niagara's. I think Concord's are a different story, but.
I want to just put in a little plug here for Veraison is actually a really good time to get out there and look for nutrient deficiencies that you might see on your leaves. And a really good way to test that is to take petiole samples. So just plug out there. I think I did with the last crop update that how to do the petiole samples, and or maybe it was even a podcast that we talked about it quickly. You want to collect 100 if they're a smaller, like a Pinot Noir. You want to do about 60 to 80 if it's a Concord for each one. Snap off the leaf blade, rinse them off so you can get any of those foliar sprays or anything that's left down there residually off with a little bit of soapy water. Dry them out either on your counter or in a low level oven. Put them in a paper bag with your sample name, the farm, the block where it came in on, all the information that's requested, which you can find on the website, and take them to your local either county association or to LERGP. But I do have to point out that if you are bringing in samples, please call ahead and make an appointment, because you can't get into any of our buildings. So we need to be able to set up a time to receive those from you. But get out there and do your petiole samples.
It's getting a little late. I just want to clarify. I think I missed it, but which petiole do you take on a shoot?
Which one? You want to take it between the most recent leaf, the most recent full leaf is where you want to take that.
And you're avoiding lateral shoots, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so duck your head under the canopy and make sure you see a berry or a couple berries on that shoot. And the only plug I would add is if you don't regularly, like almost any grower, if you don't take soil and petiole samples all the time, especially if it's been 5 years, take both and take them from the same spot, unless you're really doing some intensive sampling. There are a few growers last year, like 3 or 4, maybe 5, that went through our lab that were taking fairly small grid size samples. So maybe they're, some of them favored petioles, some of them favored soils, but they were taking between 50 and 100 samples for a couple hundred acres of grapes. And you could probably dial back on soils or petioles if that's what you're doing. But if you're taking 5-10 samples for 100 acres, take both, especially.
Yes, thank you. That's really good advice. I would also like to add that some of you have talked to me about doing little side experiments, like incorporating cover crops a little bit to see if it works for you, or dialing up your potash in certain areas, but just in a small experimental block. I would highly suggest taking petioles and soil samples from those areas and an area that you haven't, and do a little bit of a comparison to see where you are.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we'll be back next week, but this is sort of the beginning of the Good Luck Through Harvest sort of podcast. I know a lot of you are going to get really busy depending on what kind of varieties you grow. I've already started to see some schedules come through for the earlier whites. So, if you don't catch this or the next podcast until the end of harvest, good luck until then. But we will be here probably every week or almost every week through that time period, trying to keep you entertained if you listen on the go. And
Kevin will sing next time.
We've got another almost month if you're only a Concord grower. So thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us as always.
Yes, we're always here for you. Reach out via email or cell.
Thank you.